you are the human embodiment of a promise, a commitment that I made to retired General Stanley McChrystal last year on this exact stage, where he challenged us that we needed to have active duty military personnel. And I'm just so pleased that you could be here with us today. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the invitation. It's really an honor to be able to be here and to represent my Army and your Army.
Yes.
All of our Armies.
Yes, our Army, right?
Our Army. Really, really appreciate that.
I wanted to give you a sense of what you're in for this afternoon. I want to read the way a sentence in a recent article about Nadia in Army Times began. Now, keep in mind, this is the beginning of this sentence. West, a career family medicine doctor and dermatologist who boasts airborne and air assault qualifications. Okay, that's the way the sentence began, talking about you. Would you start by telling everybody what you do, what you oversee in the Army?
All right, thanks. Absolutely. So I am the Surgeon General of the United States Army, which means in that role that I'm the advisor to the Secretary of the Army, Honorable Esper, and the Chief of Staff of our Army, General Mark Milley, on all things medical. So I have to make sure that I'm up to date on everything to make sure that they're well informed. And then my other hat, I'm also the Commanding General of U.S. Army Medical Command, which oversees all the medical assets within our Army. And that's about 140,000 strong, and that includes all compos. We've got our total Army is comprised of our active component, our reserve, and our guard colleagues, with which we could not do our job if we didn't use the total force, and about 35,000 great Army civilians.
So let's just repeat that number for a moment, 140,000 people. That includes the 35,000 civilians.
Yes.
So effectively, you're running one of maybe the largest medical organization in the world? I don't know. It's bigger than any hospital anybody could get their arms around.
It's fairly large in scope and scale, and also global, because we're in pretty much all over global all over the world. We've got a major medical center, and in Germany, you might have heard of Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, and that's usually the first stopping point for any of our wounded service members who are coming in from the Central Command area of operations. And we also have some in Belgium, smaller clinics in Italy, in Korea, Japan. So we've got smaller clinics in those areas, as well as all throughout our continental United States.
I think everyone can appreciate what's different about a military medical corps, starting from having to treat soldiers in battle. But can you share with everyone from your perspective, as a physician, what the unique challenges that your organization faces?
So the unique challenges, I think, is that the complexity and the kind of the scope and scale of what we do. And it's really hard to compare directly to our civilian counterparts, where we do have treatment facilities. There's about 52 hospitals, kind of large hospitals, and outpatient clinics that I run, and then a couple hundred smaller ones. But we also have a research and development command at Fort Detrick, Maryland, that does a lot of the cutting-edge research on trauma, but not only that, countermeasures, vaccine, and kind of research. And we also have a training and doctrine-like command where we do the education and training of all our occupational specialties at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. And in addition to that, we also have an operational mission. So of course, I always tell my team, we know what we do. We have about 120 occupational specialties in Army medicine. But I always tell them to remember what you're for. And we're for taking care of soldiers, and in some cases sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen, whoever.
You're willing to do that?
Absolutely, absolutely. No, we're one team, because on the fields of friendly strife during Army-Navy games and things like that, yes, there's a little bit of tension there, but when we're doing battle to those who would do our nation harm, we are one cohesive team. So we provide medical support in those environments as well.
Can you generalize about what the medical needs of military personnel are right now?
So it's similar to the needs of anyone. I mean, our main goal is to make sure that we have healthy, fit, and resilient soldiers, and not only the soldiers but the families, because the soldiers can't be strong unless their families are also strong, because that's their support system. You don't want them worrying about their family members when they're deployed doing the nation's bidding. So making sure that they're healthy. When they first are recruited, to make sure that they're up to speed to be able to do the rigorous training required in the military. Because most of our youngsters now, they're very good at doing this, but not so much as doing this. And so in our first entry in basic training, we've found that we've had to be very deliberate in making sure that we don't get them started too quickly in strenuous activities just because they're not used to doing that. Like us older soldiers, we used to do physical education in school. That's less emphasized now. So making sure that they're just up to speed, physically fit. So we make sure that they're ready, getting them prepared, and then making sure that they have all the preventive type of capability things available to them, the immunizations, the medications, those countermeasures in the area. And if they get injured, we make sure that we take care of them.
It's so interesting that you, and of course, you're a West Point graduate, and I think of West Point as having this very rigorous physical regimen for all cadets.
Right.
It wouldn't surprise me that teenagers aren't as physically fit as they once were. It surprises me that enlistees entering the United States Army would be less physically fit than before.
Yeah, and it's really several years ago, I believe it was Admiral Mullen, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he came in and talked to us. I was a brand new one-star at the time, and he was going to tell us what he thought the biggest threat to national security was. And so I had my pin out waiting, which bad actor was it? And he said, the health of our youth. And it's really surprising when you have the chairman, who, the most powerful military leader on the globe, in my opinion, in most opinion, saying that it's a health issue that's a national security threat, because we're an all-volunteer force, and we recruit, and if only 25% of our youth today would meet the standards to join our military, and that's a little bit concerning.
Fascinating and very concerning. You mentioned he was a one-star admiral. You're a three-star general.
No, he was a 4-star admiral. I was a brand new.
You were a new one-star.
Yeah, so
gotcha.
He was kind of briefing all the new general officers several years ago. So.
Got it. You've added 2 stars since then. You're part of the overall command, what these people would understand as the executive management team of the Army. Talk about where the forces are going next, including what the technological goals of the Army are, excuse me.
That's a great question and very timely, because just on Friday, the Army announced that its new Futures Command is going to be headquartered in Austin, Texas.
Let me ask you to repeat that, the U.S. Army Futures Command.
Yes. And Secretary Esper and General Milley really have a vision to make sure that we modernize our force, because the tactics, techniques, procedures, and capabilities that we had, post-Cold War may not take us to, 2028 and beyond. And if we want to maintain the edge over our adversaries, we need to make sure that we've got the right capabilities. And so in order to do that, there are several lines of effort that our Army is looking at improving. And it's just about improving the basics of soldiering. What you need to do is to shoot, move, communicate, and then be sustained. And so that's in a nutshell what we're asked to do. But the technology that supports that, it's not shooting bows and arrows, it's shooting something a little bit more substantial than that. And so the first line of effort is long-range precision fires. Are there techniques that we can have a greater standoff in order to engage our adversaries at a much greater distance? Because our adversaries know that if they get in a one-on-one with us, it's usually not very good for them. So their goals are to keep us anti-access area denial, make sure that we don't get that close. And so how do we overcome that distance? The second line of effort is the future combat vehicle. And so our tanks and all those things that we've had that have done us very well, what do we need in the new multi-domain operations environment? The third line of effort is future vertical lift. We've got the helicopters that we've had that have done, again, very well. Our Apaches, our attack helicopters, our utility helicopters. But what's the next generation for that?
And excuse me, this puts our earlier conversations about flying taxis in context.
Absolutely.
But this is serious stuff as opposed to...
That's serious too.
Okay.
That's very serious. And then the fourth line of effort is one that I know is very important in this audience, is the network. Because having a network that is not only mobile and expeditionary, but also it's easily scaled, because again, with a 1 million-person Army, to be able to disseminate that in the different areas that we are, And then also sustainable and easily upgradable, because one of the concerns is with our acquisition processes, it takes a little bit longer. And once you find something that's would be suitable and very effective for our force, the time it takes to get it actually to the end user sometimes it's not as agile as it can be. So that's kind of what we need to do. And then it's upgradable, because once you have it, then to re-outfit the entire force again with something new in a year or 6 months actually now, as quickly as things upgrade. So how do we have that attribute? And the fifth, sorry.
Please.
So the fifth line of effort is again air defense, because you want to defend. So how do we make sure that we can engage targets in this new environment? We've heard of drones, we've heard of swarm technology. How do we defend our troops against that type of capability? And then the last one is the most important. It's the soldier lethality, because with all
soldier
lethality.
Lethality.
We want lethal soldiers, because again, it's a good deterrent if the those that would do us harm realize that we've got a very capable and lethal force. But if that's not enough to deter them, then as General Milley always says, the purpose of the Army is to close with and destroy the enemies of our nation and those who would do us harm, and we need to be able to do that. And so what are the capabilities to make sure we've got fit, healthy, resilient soldiers to be able to really use any of that technology that's developed in those previous line of effort.
Obviously, number 6 is your primary purview. I have a positive bias about the U.S. military as having the best technology in the world, the best military technology, the best that money can buy. First of all, is my positive bias accurate? And if it is, then why this 6-point plan? Why is that so necessary?
Well, and I agree. Again, I'm biased as well. I think we've got the most BA Army in the world. For those of you,
you said BA?
BA.
Gotcha.
So
okay.
You know what that means.
All right.
And
That's
so
military terminology.
It is, and so it's bad something.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's because of partners, industry partners. I mean, the military obviously doesn't do it alone. I'm sure there's many people in this room who've worked with the Department of Defense to make sure that we have those. But again, it's a glide path. So the Secretary Esper and the Chief are looking for the Army of 2028. But we don't want to start then. We need to start now to make sure that we maintain our overmatch with our adversaries, because they're also investing in technology. So it's one of those where rather than waiting to see, we have to make sure we maintain the edge.
In this corporate technology audience, you've been here since the open of the conference yesterday afternoon. Has anything surprised you? Have you learned anything you wanted to share, or that you plan on sharing with your superior officers?
Well, I think one of the things that was quite interesting, and I took pictures of the little. I love those summaries.
Aren't
because
they great?
They're phenomenal. Whoever's doing that, shout out! You're awesome.
Yeah.
Because
real skill.
It is, because you capture that. Yeah. So because it captures, and it's just the way that the way of the thought processes of senior executives, of how their success. I heard them talk about the importance of diversity, the importance of customer experience. All those different areas, and it's the same with us, because our customers, we have several levels. Our customers are the American public, and they need to have trust and confidence in us, and that's another thing I heard. Trust is extremely important, and so it's just a reemphasis of how first fragile that is, because it takes just one incident of someone, again, a 1 million-person army. It only takes one bad outcome by a small number that can erode the trust. And so I think it's important for us as military members to always remember that.
You've heard in the business community, we've been talking about diversity a lot. I know that you are both an Army brat and a West Point graduate, and I know you're very proud of the Army's diversity story. Would you share that with the audience?
Absolutely, I am extremely proud. And so as you mentioned, my father started out in the Army in 1939. And back then, it was still a segregated Army. And so he and a buddy took a train ride from New Orleans, Louisiana to Fort Huachuca, Arizona. And that's the base where they trained all of the colored troops, which is what they were called at the time. And so initially, the cadre that were responsible for training them were all Caucasian. And they thought it was a punishment tour to have to train these soldiers. However, that's how they started. That's not how they finished. Because as they were training them, they came to realize, well, these are These are like any other soldiers. There's some that really get it the first time. There's some that are take a little longer. There's some that are gifted at, assembling and disassembling their weapon. There's some, there's some that are funny. There's some that are silly. And, some that are, mean. Some that are angry. I mean, they're human beings, and so they really came to love them as their soldiers. So my dad, and again, it wasn't all rosy. I'm not painting it as a rosy picture, but the general term and the general thing my dad took out is that the Army was well ahead of society in incorporating and integrating, because it's working with people side by side when you get to realize that the divide is not as great as we think. And so he encouraged all of us to, number one, serve our nation, because it's the greatest nation on the face of the earth, no matter what. And just learning about the military, because you get to learn and be exposed to people from all walks of life from all over the country. And so fast forward, after the integration of the Army by the executive order of President Truman, then you had, women in the military. Again, my older sisters, several of them were WACs. It was the Women's Army Corps. And then that was in the late 60s, early 70s. And then my sister, the next oldest to me, joined the Navy as the first in 1973. That was the first time, I think it was around 73, that women were integrated into the regular Navy, so there were no longer separation. And then, West Point, they started integrating women in the summer of '76, and I was lucky enough to be in the 3rd class of women. I started in '78. And then fast forward now, you've got, 15 up to date. It's about 15 women who've graduated from Ranger School, which was unheard of. And all the branches are open to women,
Unheard of, including in your day, correct?
Absolutely, because women couldn't go into the combat arms or infantry. And so now that there's no combat exclusion, so women are able to serve in the branches if they are qualified and meet all the qualifications and requirements for that. And so now my son is a senior at West Point, and he's like, Mom, he doesn't even realize what it's like if they didn't have women. And I shout out to General Caslin, who just retired. He was the superintendent of West Point. He really did a lot to increase the diversity of the Corps cadets, and now 25% of the Corps cadets, of about 4,000 strong, are women, which is unheard of. And it's important because, again, more diverse groups or more intelligent groups, you get a whole different menu of options and choices and inputs to a solution.
It's super interesting, and I don't think it would naturally occur to a corporate audience that they would be behind the trend from the military in things like this. No. Questions, please, right in the front. Nathan, here's your mic coming up to you.
General Nathan Rosenberg, Insignium, class of 1974 of the United States Air Force Academy, and not a leg.
Okay, all right.
Ma'am, I wanted to follow up on an early question that Adam asked. Sorry. The survivability of men and women injured on the battlefield is nothing short of a miracle. Can you talk about the contribution of military medicine to general medicine, of what's been learned in the last decade about people recovering from really serious wounds?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, no, I feel the same, and I appreciate that question. And it's heartwarming, but one is too many. But the survival rate is now about in the high 90s, 97, 98, about 96, 97%, despite the lethality of the weapons that our adversary uses, the improvised explosive devices and things of that nature, compared to about 73% in the Vietnam era. And that's due to again, I mentioned we have a research and development command at Fort Detrick, who uses and incorporates all the lessons learned from our academic institutions. And so there's a lot of collaboration and coordination with our academic institutions, so it's back and forth. We have dedicated researchers for things that are inherently military, of course, trauma, burn, all those types of things that you would expect on a modern battlefield. And those are the things that we've learned. And one example is the tourniquet. Something, an old, Civil War tying a piece of cloth around. So it went out of favor for a while, but we found out hemorrhage is the #1 thing that kills our service members. It's because if you can't get to them and stop the bleeding in time, then all the other things don't help. So, having tourniquets and second and third generation tourniquets, to the point now we actually have something called the Reboa that was developed with our civilian counterparts, where you actually insert it into the aorta and pump it up and stop bleeding centrally to preserve just until they can get to definitive care so they don't bleed out and they can preserve the blood flow to their core organs. Something like spray-on skin was developed, 3D printing of an ear or something like that with the basic cellular, the cartilage matrix to put, and then the cell constituents are then placed over that for healing. So things like that have been a phenomenal partnership with the industrial base and our partners. And another thing that we've gone back and forth with our, should I cut?
No, please.
So back and forth with our civilian institutions, we actually had at Launch Stool, for example, the American College of Vascular Surgeons would volunteer on a volunteer basis, come over and do 2 weeks at a time, not only to bring techniques that they're using from all over the country, because they're vascular surgeons in all institutions, but learning the techniques. And a lot of them said, we learned more than we thought that we could bring. They thought they could bring more, but it was, again, a very good kind of a symbiotic relationship. So then they took all those and then exported them to the civilian sector.
If we can be very quick with the question and the answer, please.
And I'll be brief.
Not at all, not at all, please.
Jeff Miller from Uber. First of all, thank you for your lifetime of service to the Army.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
And thank you for joining us here. I really value having your perspective as part of this forum, so
thank you.
Gratitude. When we think of medical care, we often think of the physical medical care and the physical preparation to get ready for battle. I'm wondering if you comment on what strides the Army is taking on mental health fitness to get ready for battle, or mental health treatment when our troops return.
And I'm sorry to ask you to be brief, but please.
Outstanding question. One of the things to reduce the stigma of actually getting care, we're embedding behavioral health rather than having them come to the facility, actually embedding them with operational units. So they actually have either psychologists, mental health specialists right down there with the units and the troops. There are other areas, mindfulness, things like that, to help with the resilience of soldiers. But briefly, that's kind of the things that we're doing. And then treatment protocols afterwards. When they come back.
On behalf of Fortune, our entire audience, I'm so grateful you were here. You're an inspiration, you're a role model, and I'm sure that everybody will agree that you are a BA general as well.
Thanks so much. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
So much. Thank you.